Tell me a little bit about your recent research on step families. What were you and your colleagues looking at?
In the United States, family structures have grown quite diverse, with parental figures kind of transitioning in and out of households over time. And so one question that I've attended to is how can we really capitalize on these transitions in ways that benefit youth well-being? And in particular, how can we capitalize on that new step parent or social parent that comes into the household? What do those relationships look like? What are the implications of those relationships for youth well-being and development and adjustment? And so with this study, that's exactly what we looked at. We looked at 3 relationships in step families. We looked at the youth's relationship with the step parent, the youth's relationship with their resident biological parent, and then we looked at the relationship between the step parent and parent, that couple relationship. And we wanted to see if the quality of those relationships influenced various indicators of youth well-being, and in this case in the form of what we call internalizing problems or manifestations of stress that are kind of internal, usually in the forms of depression or anxiety, and also in the form of what we call externalizing problems, or when youth seem to manifest stress outwardly, acting out, conduct problems, and things of that nature.
Tell me a little bit about the parameters of the study. Was there a certain age of the youth you were looking at? Did you weigh whether it was a stepmother or stepfather in the relationship?
What we did is capitalize on previously existing data that was taken from a program evaluation study conducted in Pennsylvania and Iowa. And we looked at a sample of 191 youth who were residing in a step-family household, and that did include both stepmothers and in most cases, in fact, stepfathers. But we did include both together, but did account for the influence of the biological sex of the step-parent.
And what age were the kids you were interested in?
So this was kind of that pre-adolescent period, ages ranging from about 10 to 12, average age of about 11 years.
Why in particular that age range?
At this point, much of my work has looked at step-family relationships and youth well-being when youth are in those adolescent years. This study provided us an opportunity to kind of, scoot further back along that developmental course and look at youth prior to that transition adolescence. That's a really pivotal time period, just as adolescence is. I think in terms of a kind of prevention perspective, are there things that we can do with families when youth are in that pre-adolescent period that seem to be particularly beneficial to families and kids? So it's a good formative period of development for youth.
How long had the kids been in that step-family relationship? Had it been an established step-family, or was it a newer relationship?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember if we did collect data on that, or if data were available on that. I don't think that indicator was available in this data set. It is in others that I've looked at, but in this case, I don't think we can speak to the exact duration, but can assume that some of these families have probably been together for a number of years.
Tell me a little bit about what you found.
One thing we found was that youth well-being was related to the quality of the relationship with both the resident parent and that new step-parent. What was a particularly strong relationship was youth well-being and its relation to the quality of the relationship with that step-parent. So the higher quality or more affectionate that relationship was between the step-parent and youth, the lower amount of adjustment problems in the form of internalizing problems or externalizing problems that we saw in youth over time. So that relationship seems to be pretty important, just as the youth's relationship with that biological parent is. But the step-parent-child relationship seems to have a unique influence on youth well-being in important ways.
Or would they be surprised that the step-parent had that much of an impact on a teen or preteen coming into this relationship?
I think in a lot of cases, folks don't consider the differences between the two. Oftentimes, step-parents or social parents just kind of get bundled in as parents. And when that happens, we can kind of lose track of that unique influence a step-parent might have on youth well-being. So I think it would be surprising to some. I think a lot of research really does focus on just broadly parent-child relationships. And so this was an opportunity to kind of separate out that influence, whether you're a biological parent or that step-parent, which seems to make sense. Those roles tend to be very different, and I guess that's something that I'll end up talking more about.
You had mentioned that step-parent relationship as being pretty pivotal. While many people might have anticipated step-parents kind of get lumped in with the family. Can you talk to that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, it's really the step-parent-child relationship that makes a family a step-family in the first place. So that relationship's really central to step-family dynamics. One challenge with that relationship is that there's a lot of uncertainty around what a step-parent should be doing, could be doing in the lives of youth. Sometimes youth are a little uncertain about what role they want a step-parent to play in their lives, especially if youth have lived in maybe a single-parent household for an extended period of time. That family's developed ways of doing things, ways of interacting with one another, routines have been established. And so when a new step-parent enters in, it can be challenging to integrate that individual into that system. And these are the sorts of tensions that a lot of step-families experience and can relate with. And so the way that relationship develops over time is pivotal, it's crucial. And I think what's important is that step-families find for themselves a relationship between youth and a step-parent that makes sense for them, that works for them, that doesn't have to look like what society might think it has to look like. So I think that there's real opportunities there to focus on developing a mutually satisfying relationship that isn't bound by any sort of pressure or unrealistic expectations. But again, because that relationship is what makes a family a step-family in the first place, that's a really important site for us to kind of attend to, either as helping professionals or as if we're in these families ourselves.
What are the implications from these findings? What do people take away from this study?
Well, for one, families that deviate from that kind of nuclear first-time family model, it's become so increasingly common that families don't look like that. It's important that these different family structures receive the attention and voice that they deserve, and an exploration of what are the unique dynamics in these situations, what are things that these families can do that optimize stability within the family and that really cultivate meaningful, strong relationships over time. So I think foremost, these other families, like step-families, deserve more attention. They shouldn't necessarily be clumped into other family systems because they differ in important ways. And I think we do a disservice when we ignore that fact.
What can step-parents do coming into that situation, knowing that they play such a pivotal role?
I think one of the most important things that new step-parents and parents with kids can do when these families form is to be flexible, to not hold on to expectations that might be overly unrealistic. As challenging as that can be, I think we all envision for ourselves rewarding family relationships. We have a vision in our minds what that looks like. But there are complex backgrounds and histories that all of the kids and the parents are bringing together. And oftentimes there's parental figures who are residing elsewhere that are still a part of the family system. So navigating all that requires a great amount of maturity and flexibility and really kind of security in yourself and your relationship with your new partner if you're a step-parent or that parent residing at home with the kids. So I think flexibility is key. So part of that includes good open communication, fostering an environment where folks can share their concerns and worries, and that includes letting children have a voice. And I think an important thing that parents can do is to maintain solid ties with their kids amid this transition. Oftentimes, kids can feel a bit threatened when there's big changes to that family structure or system. And so when parents can reassure kids that they're still available and responsive, that can go a long way to relieving stress among youth during a transition such as that to a step-family life.
Are there steps that a step-parent can take to begin to build a relationship with stepchildren?
I think it's a collaborative process. I think it's something that youth can speak openly about, step-parents can speak openly about, parents can speak openly about. But I think one important thing is that youth and their new step-parents be provided space to explore that relationship in a way that feels safe and comfortable, with the realization that they'll need to be patient. These sorts of relationships take time to develop. I mean, even in the best case scenarios, research shows that even 4 years or more might be required to get a step family to a point where things feel stable and predictable and really kind of satisfying all around for everyone involved.
And this is not a quick fix, stir it up, instant family. This is something that takes some work.
Yeah, there's no real silver bullet. There's no way to kind of just rush through it. In fact, I think it's cases when families try to do that it causes more conflict and tension. You know, kind of pushing aggressively towards, we're a cohesive family, you know, it's going to look this way, here are the roles we're all going to have. But instead it kind of unfolds, it should unfold, I would argue, organically and in a way that everyone kind of has a voice to what's going on. And I think this is especially true when youth are older, in these kind of pre-adolescent years or adolescent years. Because when children are much younger, this transition can be a little bit easier.
Is there anything in particular the biological parent needs to do while all of this is unfolding?
Oftentimes, biological parents serve as gatekeepers between the step-parent and child. So I think parents are in kind of a challenging position where they're trying to develop a strong relationship with that new couple unit, and at the same time maintain close ties to their children. And the demands of both of those tasks can sometimes feel overwhelming. And so I think making sure the family has time to spend one-on-one, parents between youth between step-parents with parents, making sure time's carved out for all those relationships to develop over time and to be sustained.
So again, carve out time with youth and just step-parent, youth and just parent, and then as a unit?
Yeah, rather than necessarily trying to feel like everyone needs to be together all the time, we're all going to be cohesive together as one unit. Sometimes relationships develop at a different pace than others. So having space available for those relationships to develop can be advantageous, can be helpful.
As part of what you studied, you looked at the emotions or the stressors. Can you speak to that a little bit?
The main outcomes we looked at were what we call internalizing problems. So that can take the shape of depressive symptoms, anxiety, really any manifestation that occurs within the child in response to stress. And then the other outcome we looked at was in the form of externalizing problems. So that manifests itself when youth are acting out that stress in important ways, whether in the form of conduct, behavior problems, aggression, conflict, those sorts of things.
Within your study, did researchers look at the developing relationship of that family, how that impacted the kids' behavior or how they were feeling? And can you speak to that?
We looked at 3 relationships within step families that are really important, and that's the relationship between youth and their resident parent, youth and that new step parent, and then that couple relationship in the household. And we wanted to see if the quality of those relationships influenced those sorts of internalizing or externalizing problems in youth. And we did find that the quality of the relationship between youth and their parent and with their step parent were both important relationships in kind of predicting those outcomes.
How did you measure the quality relationship?
These are multiple questions asked of the youth in terms of how they perceived the level of affection and warmth and kindness from their parental figures. And then parents were asked about the quality of the relationship with the step-parent.
The couple themselves, you did some measures on their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to that a little bit?
That was one of the relationships of interest to us because there is some research showing that the quality of, well, there's a lot of research showing in general that the quality of the parental relationship, so between parents, can influence youth well-being. So if a couple relationship's highly conflictual and youth are exposed to that conflict, that can increase stress within youth in ways that lead them to not adjust well over time and to kind of decrease their well-being. So we wanted to test that specifically here with these step families, and we found that relationship, that couple relationship in step families was not directly linked to youth well-being, but that it's hard to go into this without going into too much details about like the statistics and the methods involved. But all those 3 relationships we assessed were assessed in concert with one another. And so if one relationship no longer was significantly linked to our outcomes, it was because it was in the presence of other more influential relationships, such as the parent-child relationships. It doesn't mean it's not important. It just means relative to the parent-child relationships, it may not be as directly influential.
Do you have any numbers on how many people in the United States are in these step-family units?
There's some recent research that shows that by age 12, on average in the United States, youth will have experienced at least one family structural transition, meaning a parental figure exiting or entering the household. And research has also estimated that about 1/3 of all youth in the United States will live in a step-family household at some point before reaching age 18. So a substantial portion of youth will experience this family structure. So I think that further warrants our attention to these families.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would want to make sure that viewers know?
I would say that step families, although they face in many cases a unique set of demands or challenges, there are some really meaningful opportunities for these families to create a very powerful and meaningful context for youth to thrive and for the adults to thrive. It just takes time, but I'm really optimistic. I think as we continue to move forward, I think more and more step families will be comfortable with the fact that, hey, we experience things that other family structures don't, and that's okay. It all comes down to how do we together face these challenges in an open, cooperative way and move towards goals that we have collectively or individually to promote our well-being. So I'm optimistic that step families can really get things right and things can go very well despite some of the challenges that are kind of naturally a part of that family structure.
Could you run through some of the challenges when you're putting families together?
For one, oftentimes parents and step-parents disagree about parenting strategies for kids. So that can be one challenge. Another common challenge is parents navigating that co-parental relationship with a non-resident parent, especially if that's a very conflictual relationship. That's a challenge. One challenge for youth oftentimes is what we call a loyalty bind. Sometimes youth worry that getting closer to a new step-parent might feel disloyal to a non-resident parent. And that takes a variety of forms, but that's one example. One challenge is ambiguity about who's supposed to do what. Is the step-parent supposed to be a disciplinarian in the household? And if so, to what extent? So that sort of uncertainty or ambiguity is a very common challenge. Oftentimes when families come together to form a step family, they will relocate somewhere. So that creates a moment of change that can be stressful for adults and kids involved. Those are some examples of some common challenges.
You talked about the step-family relationship, especially with the step-parent. Could you give some examples of good ways to get that relationship?
Yeah, I think what research has shown works well when step-families are forming, especially if youth are a bit older. Having the biological parent be the disciplinarian, and then letting there be space for youth and new step-parents to get acquainted, to get used to one another. And I think step-parents can focus on more positive interactions, focus more on kind of cultivating a friendship with youth that may evolve into something else. But maybe that's something else I should emphasize is there's really no one way to be a step-parent. There are step-families who forge these step-parent-child relationships that really vary. Some become very close and almost parent-like in their nature. Others, close acquaintances, but not, the relationship might not run too deep. Other cases, it might feel like a friendship. In other words, there's just a lot of variation. So that should be a good news story. There's not a one-size-fits-all situation for step families.
Tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you get your undergraduate degree? What was that in, and where was your master's?
I did my undergraduate degree in family studies at Brigham Young University, followed by a master's in social work at the same institution. And then I received my PhD in social work here in the School of Social Work at UNC.